a sugya that dealt with a makeup with mine targima, making up a meal that you missed. Either it's the first night meal that you missed, or it's one of the other meals that you missed, and you're making it up on Shmini Atzeres. That was a whole topic of discussion, which we spent many hours dealing with. And then the Gemara, after that discussion, the Gemara dealt with the apotropos of the house of Agrippus, Agrippa of the palace of Agrippus, Agrippus the king. And he had an issue with the fact that he normally only eats one meal a day. Would he be exempt on Sukkot and from eating two meals, even though Rabbi Eliezer holds you have to eat two meals a day, which is a machlokes if Rabbi Eliezer retracted from the fact that you have to eat two meals a day, or did he retract from the fact you have to eat two meals in the sukkah a day? So that's a question between Rashi and Tosfos and other commentaries, how exactly to learn the retraction of Rabbi Eliezer. But either way, he initially held you have to have 14 meals, that's for sure. According to that, this apotropos, this building manager, this attendant at the house at the palace of Agrippus, wanted to know about his own personal obligation. Would he have to have 2 meals a day on Sukkot? And the answer that Rabbi Eliezer told him was seemingly yes, that you normally snack, so instead of you anyway snack, so either why don't you have a meal in place of that? In other words, once you're anyway snacking, so why don't you either have a meal, or if you why don't you limit yourself from one of the snacks and eat a meal instead of it, or eat an extra snack, and that would be considered like a meal, or So the basic different ways of understanding the wording of the Gemara, but and the meaning. But ultimately, he held that you should have another meal, except that you could maybe have it with a parperes, that type of delicacy, or some type of a snack should be considered a meal, or it'll be an appetizer that will lead you to have another meal. But ultimately, you should have an extra meal on Yom Tov. And he asked him another question about having 2 sukkahs, and the answer to that was also, sorry, you got to have 1 sukkah, and you can't go from one sukkah to another sukkah. And that was an interesting opinion, because, of course, we're not familiar with that. We don't follow that. That's not the accepted halacha. The halacha is you could have many sukkahs. You could jump from one sukkah to another sukkah. You could build a sukkah on Chol Hamoed, and so on and so forth. Not exactly like Rabbi Eliezer holds. That's not exactly the halacha. But anyway, this man was asking Rabbi Eliezer, and he got his answer, what Rabbi Eliezer would say, that you can't go from one sukkah to another sukkah. And he learns it from the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Taselucha, that you have to have a sukkah for 7 days, that the sukkah itself should last for 7 days. And it's not just that it has to be handled 7 days. It's not just the sukkah has to be potentially in existence for 7 days. It actually has to be your sukkah. You have to use it for those 7 days. You can't just jump around. You're sort of like connected to your sukkah, and you don't just go to other sukkahs. But the rabbis don't learn it that way, and they understand that you should make a sukkah. You should make a sukkah for sukkahs, not for 7. Not necessarily does your sukkah have to be the sukkah that you use. And the Gemara came out with this scenario where, what happens if your sukkah falls down? So would Rabbi Eliezer allow you to rebuild it? What do you do then? So in that, the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer agrees that if it fell down, it's considered like the same sukkah, and you can rebuild it. Tosfos has a question over here. If what happens if does that mean you can only rebuild it with the same wood that you used to build it the first place, or Does that mean if it fell and you're going to rebuild it? What happens if you need to exchange some of the pieces? Would that also be good? So the top Tosfos over here says some of the Svarim, it actually says since you're using those pieces, therefore it's considered one. You is considered the same sukkah. That's why Rabbi Eliezer would allow you to rebuild that same sukkah because you're using the same pieces. But if you were gonna exchange change it and use something else, that wouldn't be considered acceptable. So that seems like Tosfos seems to accept that as if that's the meaning of Rabbi Eliezer, that you would need to use the same sukkah pieces that you initially built it with, and that would be why it's the same sukkah, even though it fell down. It's still your 7-day sukkah that you're using, and that's connected to you. And your Yaitze Chag HaSukkos Tasa L'cha, it's yours, and so on. And you have to make the 7-day your 7-day sukkah. So that was the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Again, we don't follow that, and we hold that there's no issue in the first place because you could use someone else's sukkah. You could jump around to different sukkahs. You could have many sukkahs, and it's not a problem. And even if you only use your sukkah one day, it's also kosher. Okay, now comes the next Gemara, and the next Gemara is Tanya Rabbi Eliezer. We actually started it, but I'm going to start it again. It's page 27b, and we're maybe about 10 lines from the top of the page. 10 lines from the top of the page. Tanya, taught in a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer says, the same way you can't be yoitza the lulav using someone else's lulav on Sukkot. The lachem has to be yours, and the Gemara understands it to mean. Oh, did I just lose everyone?
Oh no, we're here.
We're still here.
No,
My screen just went blank. Okay.
We can see you and hear you.
Okay. So it says the same. That is so strange. I did this again now.
We still see you and hear you.
Okay, good. I don't know what, something must have gotten pressed. I don't know. Okay. So it says the same way that you can use, you need to use your lulav, and you can't use someone else's lulav. It has to be yours because it says ulakachtem lachem, which lachem means take to you, for you, and it means mishalachem, means yours. So the same thing would apply to sukkah. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. And let's read it inside. The same way you cannot fulfill your obligation on the first day of Sukkot with the lulav of your friend, as it says, should take for yourself on the first day pre-Eitz Hadar. It means an esrog, a beautiful fruit from a tree. Kapos tamarim, a branch from the date palm. Mishalachem. So it says olakachtem lachem. It means mishalachem. It has to be yours. You can't borrow it or. So also kach you can't be yotze. You don't fulfill the obligation by using someone else's sukkah. The sukkah of your friend is not good enough. It has to be yours. It has to be yours. You have to make there's a holiday of Sukkot you should make for yourself 7 days. It has to be from yours. It has to be your own. And the rabbis say, even though they say that you are not fulfilling the obligation if you use someone else's lulav, but you can fulfill the obligation using someone else's sukkah. As it says, all the residents among the Yidden shall dwell in sukkahs. And the word sukkais in the Chumash, it spells it singular. Interestingly, our Gemara says both vavs, but the pasuk says yeshvu basukais kol ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu basukais. And that word basukais really has no vavs, even though our Gemara spells it with two vavs. Really, it's in the Chumash it's spelled with no vavs. And the understanding is that one sukkah should be acceptable. Sukkais, as if it says sukkas or sukkah. It's as if it says sukkah with a singular because it's missing the vavs. So the understanding is that everyone, Melamed, this teaches us, Shekol Yisrael Re'uyim, Leishev, everyone is able to dwell b'sukkah achas in one sukkah. Now, one is able to dwell in one sukkah. So Rashi explains here that is it possible that everyone owns this one sukkah? Could everyone be a partner and it's considered yours? Rashi says impossible. Because if you have one sukkah to fit, if you have one sukkah for all of Klal Yisrael, how many Yidden are there? Well, the general rule is there's 600,000 souls, but each soul is divided into many parts, and we know that there's millions of Yidden. Now, if a million people, even if there was 1 million that owned one sukkah, each one, how much would they have to pay to participate in this sukkah? It would be very, very minimal. A sukkah does not cost $1 million, so they're not giving a dollar each. A sukkah doesn't cost $500,000. Not giving 50 cents each. A sukkah doesn't cost a hundredth of $1 million. So ultimately, everyone's giving less than a penny in order to dwell in the sukkah. So they can't be called real partners. Partner is someone who at least invested a pruta. A pruta is like the smallest coin, and which officially is a few cents. And if you give less than a penny, you haven't even participated a pruta size, the size of minimum size. So you can't be called a partner. What can you be called? You can be called someone who borrows the sukkah because you're pretty much borrowing it. It's not yours. The sukkah, if there's 1 million people in this one sukkah, now Rashi also mentions that don't mean that it's a sukkah that's going to fit all the Yidden. It means one after another in different stages. They could dwell in the sukkah. So they're not necessarily is this a huge sukkah that's fitting, 1 million people or 50 million to 10 million people or however many million Yidden there are, 15 million, whatever it is. But it's not a sukkah. It means zeh achar zeh. It means one after another, meaning they don't all have to dwell in it at once. So it's not a huge sukkah, and everyone's participating less than a pruta, but you're borrowing the sukkah. You're able, and that's kosher. You're allowed, you could dwell in such a sukkah. It must mean that a sukkah that you're not a partner in and you don't own any of it, you are eligible to be yotza, the mitzvah of sukkah, and that's learned from the pasuk, that it's missing vavs, the word sukkais. It's as if it said it's singular. You could all dwell in one sukkah, and you're obviously not an owner, so therefore it means that even someone, you could borrow someone's sukkah. Yes, Victor.
If you took all the Yidden in the world, and even 7 days of Sukkot, even if they all pass through for like a second apiece, I still don't think you're going to make it. You're not going to get everybody in and out in time. All 7 days.
We're not talking about a tiny sukkah, but I'm also saying we don't have to be talking about a sukkah the size of the size of the state of New York. You know what I mean? We're talking about obviously a huge sukkah that would work, and that everyone could come in at least once, but still would cost less. It would be less than a shava pruta. So therefore, Rashi says that's how the Gemara understands. That's how the rabbis are learning the Gemara, that it must be that that a borrowed sukkah is kosher. That you see from there that a borrowed sukkah is kosher. It's interesting. This pasuk, this idea that Ru'uyin Kol Yisrael Leishav Sukkah Achas, that all the Yidden are able to dwell in one sukkah. This idea is brought many times in Hasidic writings about how the idea of sukkahs is all about unity. that all the Yidden are able to dwell in one sukkah, that the sukkah is supposed to encompass all of Klal Yisrael. It's a concept that emphasizes the concept of unity, which is emphasized numerous times on Sukkot, and the other is, of course, the lulav with the esrog and the hadassim and aravos is the concept of unity. But this is brought out here as well. It's emphasized this
Is
idea.
this referring to the Leviathan when we're all going to be Sukkot? You know, this giant Sukkot Leviathan, I think it's referred to.
That I don't know. We have
the
Betzalel
Levo,
here.
I think.
We have Betzalel over here who wrote a book called the Leviathan. So if he wants to share on it, maybe you could shed some light on it if you want. So, but okay. So so we have a machloikas here. We have a machloikas here. If you're allowed to use a borrowed sukkah, I should just mention that Tosfos initially is not satisfied with it. He feels that Rashi went overboard over here. No. You have to go out. So Tosfos not satisfied here with Rashi's way of explaining it. In other words, Rashi's all bothered with, well, maybe we're dealing with a case that all the Yidden are partners. That's what Rashi's bothered with. Sure. Okay. Sorry about that. So we're dealing with a case where Rashi's saying that Rashi's all bothered with, maybe it's talking about a case where everyone's a partner and then they're considered like an owner. And if they're considered like an owner, then maybe that's the meaning of the pasuk. And therefore, maybe you do have to own your sukkah. And it's just that partners are considered owners. And therefore, that's what the way Rashi seems to be bringing out this idea that it can't be that. In other words, Rashi's bothered that maybe that would be the pshat. And then the Gemara's proof is not such a proof. And I was trying to prove that borrowing a sukkah isn't good enough. You need actually to you need to own the sukkah. And Tosfos says that borrowing and being a partner is really the same thing. And Tosfos brings proofs throughout Shas. Many cases he talks about. He brings a case of Reishis Hagez. If you own a sheep in a partnership, if you take challah, you have dough in its own partnership. If you pay, if you have a field, that's a partnership. Esrog, all these cases, whenever we exclude borrowing, it excludes partners also. In other words, if you're not the owner, even if you're a partner, you're not called the owner. So Tosfos wants to say that in the case of sukkah, we could say the same thing, that you're a partner, but you're still that would still, the fact that you're able to dwell in this sukkah as a partner means you don't have to be the owner. Meaning ownership means you own the whole thing. Once you're a partner, it's basically the same as borrowing. That's the way Tosfos sees from other sources in Shas. And he says that according to that, you don't have to go through Rashi's way of getting around this problem. And Rashi says, well, it can't be done about that you're a partner because you have less than a Shabbat Pruta, you have less than the minimum amount. And then therefore it can't be that you're a partner because you're not a partner. If you own such a small, tiny amount, you can't be called a partner. Tosfos says, no. The fact that you're a partner doesn't ruin what the Gemara is saying, because all the Gemara is saying is you have to be that you might think that you have to be a full-fledged owner, which means you own the whole thing. And the answer of the Gemara in the rabbis hold that no, that's not true. That you could either be a partner, you could be you could borrow it, you could be a partner. And I was that you don't have to own it. You could even be a partner. Now the Tosfos then says, but you know what? There is one place in Shas where it sort of proves wrong my point. Tosfos says tzitzis. In case of tzitzis, Taisa says you're chayiv in tzitzis if you're a partner, but if you borrow it, you're exempt from tzitzis. So if you're a partner in a garment that has 4 corners, and you put on that garment, you'd be obligated in tzitzis. What do you mean? I don't own it. You do own it. You're a partner, and partner is considered owning. But if you borrow a garment that has 4 corners, you'd be exempt from tzitzis. So Taisa says from there, you could say the same thing maybe by sukkah, that maybe a sukkah, maybe you'll say everyone is fit to dwell in a sukkah, and it means that you still have to own it. You might have to own it, and you're eligible. You could dwell in the same sukkah because a sukkah of partners is kosher, but borrowed sukkah, no, maybe that's not acceptable. Maybe
what about for
hey, yes,
tzitzis from Mars Zion? Person has a 4-corner garment, and he doesn't have tzitzis, and everybody doesn't know that it's a borrowed garment.
Right. Mara Zion is an interesting halacha. You have to know where, when it applies and how far to take it. But the essence, or maybe rabbinically, you would say that you're right. Maybe rabbinically you'd say if you borrow a garment, even if you would say such a thing, it's still biblically the law would be that you're exempt from tzitzis. You know what I mean? So even if you want to tell me that you need to put on tzitzis rabbinically, which I don't know that that's the case, but even if that would be so, still biblically on a biblical level, it would be exempt from tzitzis. And so the Gemara is, the fact that there could be you could differentiate between partnership and borrowing. The fact that you have that there could be that our Gemara also would be able to differentiate between the two in the case of sukkah. And so if the rabbis hold that a partnered sukkah is kosher, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would allow a borrowed sukkah. They might only allow a partnered sukkah, just like we find by tzitzis, that the partnered tzitzis, if you have a partnered garment, you're obligated in tzitzis. A borrowed garment is exempt from tzitzis. So maybe you'd say the same thing by sukkah. And therefore, Rashi has to go out of his way to come up with an explanation of why the case cannot be talking about partnered sukkah. And it must be showing that even a borrowed sukkah is kosher. In other words, Rashi goes out of his way to show that a borrowed sukkah is kosher. Why is he going out of his way? Because if it would be a case of a partnered sukkah, that will not prove that a borrowed sukkah is kosher. Could be that only a partnered sukkah is kosher. And Rashi has to go out of his way and say, no, but it can't be talking about partnered. It must be talking about borrowed, because partnered would mean that you own a certain portion of it. And if you own less than a pruta, such a tiny portion is not considered a portion. And therefore you would be, you wouldn't be called an owner, and you wouldn't be called a partner. And it must be that what we're dealing with here is the sukkah is not owned by all Klal Yisrael, but it's used by all Klal Yisrael, even though they don't own it. You see from there that you don't have to own your sukkah. You could even borrow someone's sukkah, be invited as a guest into someone's sukkah. And so that's what the rabbis are learning. Again, Rabbi Eliezer holds you need to own your sukkah. That was Rabbi Eliezer's view. The rabbis have this source that called Ezrach b'Yisrael Yeshu Basukais, and therefore they learn that it even includes a borrowed sukkah. And according to Taisha, seems to agree in the end that Rashi needs to come up with his way of proving it, because you see from tzitzis that you could differentiate sometimes between being a partner and being a borrower. So in the end, Taisha has a different question. We sort of touched on it on either Thursday or Friday, that Rabbi Eliezer holds you need to own your own sukkah. Now, what do you do for your family? Does your children also have to own your sukkah? They have to own their sukkah? Do you build a separate sukkah for your children? They became bar mitzvah, or you're going to build a sukkah for your 13-year-old. He has to dwell in his sukkah. You're not allowed to borrow someone else's sukkah. Would he be allowed to use your sukkah? According to Rabbi Eliezer. Again, the rabbis hold you can even borrow a sukkah, but you don't have to own your sukkah. Lulav, you have to own. Everyone agrees you have to own your own lulav esrog. But sukkah, you could borrow. The rabbis, but Rabbi Eliezer holds no. Just like lulav, you have to own your own sukkah. So Taisa says, so what's going to happen according to Rabbi Eliezer? That you're going to each household member has to have their own sukkah. So he says that Teishvu kiein toduru. You have to dwell in the sukkah like you would dwell in your house. And that would mean that your family would be included, would be allowed to dwell in one sukkah. But then Taisa says, okay, fine. So that explains Rabbi Eliezer's view about sukkah. What about the rabbi's view and Rabbi Eliezer's view about lulav? There are many cities where the whole city, the community, buys one lulav and esrog. And they would gather money together. In the olden days, they didn't have money for each person to buy their own lulav and esrog like we have today. They would put money together, and the whole community would buy one lulav and esrog. Now that lulav and esrog was, you would call it maybe a partnership with the community, but a partner is not eligible to use a lulav on the first day. If you tell your friend, we're going to be partners on a lulav, I don't feel like buying my own lulav, it's $100. I'm going to instead do 50 and you do 50, and we'll buy a lulav and esrog for both of us. You're my next door neighbor. Doesn't work. The first day of Sukkot, you need to own it. You need to own your lulav and esrog. So Tosafos' case is where the whole community does that. Each one gives $1, and they all together, they have $100. They buy their lulav and esrog, and that's what they would do. And Tosafos says, but how does that work? You're not allowed to use a lulav and esrog that's not fully yours. It has to be 100% yours. So on that, Tosafos says that each person has in mind to give whoever is saying the bracha, they're giving their portion to you for that moment that you're saying the bracha and shaking it. We're giving it to you as a gift, al manas lahachzir, to return it, on the condition to return it. That's why we're participating in order to give it to you. So in other words, they all have in mind to give it to you, to give you their portion for that moment. And you have in mind to give me your portion on that moment that I'm going to say the bracha. And Tosafos says that it can't be worse than if I hand it to you and say it's a matana manas lahachzir. Just because you're a partner doesn't mean I can't do a matana manas lahachzir with a partner. I can do a gift on the condition that you return it. You know, if you're not a partner, I can give it to you and say, I'm giving it to you as a gift, and you own it now. Now it's yours. I'm not on the condition that you return it after. So that I could do. So now that you're a partner, it's not going to be any worse. But what's interesting from Tosafos is that Tosafos says, Daiton lahaknos kolechot chelte lachavira. And it makes a lot of sense. Tosafos says, Daiton, they have in mind to give you their portion when you're saying the bracha. You know what that means? That you don't actually have to say, I am giving this to you as a matana manas lahachzir, as a gift on the condition to return it. That's what I have in mind. When we bought it, I had that in mind. So I don't know when you're holding it. I don't know that you're holding it now and I'm going to hold it in 2 hours from now. And you're holding it now and I'm having in mind to give it to you and I'm having it in mind to give it to you. No. When our intention, the whole community's intention is that it's good enough when to give it to you as a gift. So that's good enough that you're yaitza with that intention, that when we're buying it, that the intention is that you're going to fulfill the obligation, and in a way that you own it for your moment, and I'll be the full owner for my moment. So according to this, you could do it with your next door neighbor as well, and you could say, you have in mind that you're going to own it fully when you say the bracha on it, and I'm going to own it fully when I say the bracha on it. So theoretically, that's fine. I mean, you could also not buy either of you and just borrow someone else's, and he'll give it to you as a gift, not borrow. He'll give it to you as a gift, and you could also get away with that. But the point is that you have to be the full-fledged owner. Now, one of the questions that interesting question that comes up is, does this only work when you're dealing with people who know the halacha? In other words, your community, we all know that a lulav you have to own, and you're supposed to give it to each other as a matana al manas lachzer, a gift on the condition to own it. So let's say I hand you my lulav and esrog because you need a lulav and esrog. Even if I don't say matana manas lahachzir, gift on the condition to return it, seems like it should be fine because that's obviously what I have in mind when I'm giving it to you. And Shulchan Aruch brings this. But my question takes it a step further. What happens when you're dealing with someone who's not frum and someone who doesn't know the halachas of lulav, someone who's not familiar with these type of laws? Would then you say the same thing, that he's owning it even though you're having in mind to give it to him? But does he need to have in mind to take ownership of it in order to be his? In other words, I'm handing it to him. Maybe I have in mind that I'm giving it to him as a gift, but something that I have to look up and see what the poskim say. Would he need to have in mind? In other words, do you have to tell someone? It's brought down in one of the Sfarim, Hayomim, that a person should say Matana Manas L'Hachzir. At least in the Hayomim, in the Babich is a small book that has certain little tidbits of information. So one of the things it says is you should do it b'frat b'yom rishon, especially on the first day. You should say it's a matana, a gift, on the condition to give it back. So of course we try to say that. But if you didn't say it, Shulchan Aruch mentions that it's okay. But the question is Shulchan Aruch talking about someone who knows the halacha? What would happen if someone doesn't know that halacha? Anyway, it's just an interesting question that it's something I have to think about or ask a Rav what the conclusion is. But the point is that we see here that you have to own your lulav and esrog. And one of the problems, and we'll deal with it later, or it'll come up. What happens when you want to let your child make the bracha on the lulav and esrog? Because a child has the ability to take something, but he doesn't have the ability to return something. So it becomes much more problematic. And of course, we'll talk about it more then. But here we're just dealing with owning a sukkah. On the side, we mentioned about a lulav. Okay, so getting back to the Gemara here. So we have this machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis, about owning your sukkah. And the rabbis say you don't have to own it. And you see from the pasuk, you can even borrow it. Rabbanon. So the Gemara asks, we're on page 27b, and we are about maybe 25 lines from the top of the page. Rabbanon and the rabbis, hi lecha my darshi bay. What do they do with the word lecha? The word lecha, it says chag hasukah is tase lecha. What do they use that for? Rabbi Eliezer used it that you have to own it. What do the rabbis do with the word lecha? So the Gemara answers, mi boile, they need it, lemeute gezula, to exclude a sukkah that is stolen, a stolen sukkah that you are not yotze. You cannot fulfill the obligations of the mitzvah of sukkah. Aval she'ula ksiv kol ezrach. But by borrowed sukkah, the pasuk says kol ezrach, and that shows that even a borrowed sukkah is permissible. Rabbi Eliezer, hi kol ezrach, my ovid, right? What does Rabbi Eliezer do with the pasuk kol ezrach bi Yisrael yeshu basukais, that the rabbis used to teach you that even a borrowed sukkah is kosher? How does Rabbi Eliezer understand that pasuk? All residents of Yidden dwell in sukkahs, and it says it's singular. Doesn't that mean that they could all dwell in one sukkah? So the Gemara says, no, mi boyle, he needs that pasuk leger shenes gayer beinatayim, for a ger that becomes a convert in the middle of sukkahs. V'katon shenes gadol beinatayim, that a child that becomes an adult, it means he reaches the age of 13 in the middle of sukkahs. It means he was born on sukkahs. So the middle of sukkahs is his birthday. That Rabbi Eliezer holds you're not allowed to make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed. The sukkah has to be for 7 days. But nevertheless, if a person becomes Jewish in the middle of Sukkot, or a person grows up becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of Sukkot, there he would be eligible to build a sukkah, it would be a kosher sukkah. It's not for 7 days, but it's going to be kosher. And that he learns because it says, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, all residents of Yidden, even someone who became Jewish now, and he doesn't have the 7 days, even someone who just became an adult now and doesn't have the 7 days. Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, yeshu b'sukkos, should dwell in sukkos, and even though they don't have the 7 days, the pasuk comes and says that they are eligible. It's interesting that Rebbe Eliezer doesn't seem to include a person who missed out before Sukkot and didn't build it. That we should, maybe he was an oines, he had no choice. Maybe that should be a case where Rebbe Eliezer would allow him to build a sukkah now in the middle, but he doesn't learn it that way. Rabbi Eliezer learns, no, it includes a case, kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, in other words, not a case of an emergency, but rather someone who's Ezra, kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, a person who became now a resident of Yidden. Here, in other words, it doesn't sound like a case of oines. And so he doesn't learn that it includes a case of an oines. In other words, what would happen according to Rabbi Eliezer, a person was sick on Erev Sukkot, and he couldn't build a sukkah. Would he be exempt? Now, Chol HaMoed comes, he's feeling better. So the first few days, he missed out on a sukkah. The last few days of Sukkot, he wants to have a sukkah. So what would Rebbe Eliezer say? Oh, you're exempt. You were exempt, or you couldn't build it. Now you have no, the sukkah is for 7 days. You're exempt. A person who becomes bar mitzvah, that he includes, that he understands from the pasuk of Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, a person who becomes Jewish now, a person who becomes a resident, all the Ezrach, even though you became, but it's not including a case of an oines of a person who who messed up and wasn't able to build it. That's what that you see here in the Gemara. At least the Aruch Lener brings out that point. So it's not my own little insight, but I'm just bringing it out because otherwise you would think Rabbi Eliezer would add that to the list of those that are eligible to build a sukkah. He doesn't add it here. He just says the katan and the ger, and these are two cases where normally they should be included in the they should be excluded, I should say, from the mitzvah of sukkah. And here the pasuk comes and includes them and says, no, even though they're not going to have a sukkah for 7 days, they're still going to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. It is interesting about the katan that the child who becomes an adult is going to should have been exempt. He should have been exempt. What happens? Why? He had a mitzvah of chinuch before, and he dwelled in the sukkah before. So are you going to say that he should have been exempt from the sukkah now that he became bar mitzvah? He's exempt from the sukkah just because he didn't have a sukkah for 7 days. He did have a sukkah for 7 days. He had a sukkah while he was fulfilling the mitzvah of chinuch, or his father was fulfilling the mitzvah of chinuch. So you could think such a thing. So of course this is a topic of a lot of discussion. This source over here about a katan shenis gadol, a child who becomes an adult in the middle, and it's really a discussion. It comes up many times. It's a discussion often by the laws of Sfiras HaOmer. If a child counted Sfira and then he becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of Sfira, right? That's the famous bar mitzvah pshatel for anyone getting bar mitzvah in the middle of between Pesach and Shavuos. They always have that. That's often one of the topics of their sermon of the bar mitzvah speech of a child, but this seemingly could be a little source that you need a pasuk to include the katan, and if not for this pasuk, if not for this extra verse, you would say that even though the child dwelled in the sukkah the first few days, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would be exempt when he's bar mitzvah. It's not a sukkah of 7 days for him. You know, it seems like it could be used as somewhat of a source that to the laws of a child that becomes a gadol. Okay. Anyway, the bottom line is that we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. He learns that Kol Ezrach doesn't include a borrowed sukkah. It includes these two cases where a person becomes part of the Jewish people on Sukkot, in the middle of Sukkot. The Gemara says, V'Rabbanon, in the rabbis, why don't they learn like Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara answers, Kivan Sha'amru, since they said, Oisin Sukkah b'Chol Shel Mayed, that you can make a Sukkah on Chol Mayed, and even someone who maybe wasn't obligated in Sukkah before, you can make a Sukkah on Chol Mayed. La Yitzchok, you don't need a pasuk. Of course, they would build a sukkah now, because there's no problem with building a sukkah now, according to the rabbis. It's the problem was according to Rabbi Eliezer, and even someone who was obligated, he didn't build a sukkah, he's allowed to build it. So for sure, this person would be eligible to build a sukkah. Even a person who was supposed to build a sukkah and didn't can build it on Chol Hamoed. So for sure, someone who was not able to build it, like a katan that became an adult, or a ger became Jewish now, so for sure they would be able to build a sukkah. There's no problem with building a sukkah on Chol Hamoed, according to the rabbis.
Rabbi, how come we have a pasuk for Pesach Sheni, but I've never, there's no such thing as Sukkot Sheni. Yeah.
According to Rabbi Eliezer, you're asking according to Rabbi Eliezer.
Yeah.
According to Rabbi Eliezer, you should have a second sukkah, right? If Pesach,
nowadays we don't really, you can eat a piece of matzah on Pesach Sheni, but there's really nothing, nothing we do, and there's no Beit HaMikdash, but
right. So really, Pesach Sheni is really a makeup for the carbon. The carbon on Erev Pesach. And Erev Sukkot, you don't have that carbon. And so it really, there isn't a similarity there. In other words, we don't have a Pesach Sheni if you missed eating matzah on Pesach, that you could do it Pesach Sheni. We have a minhag, of course, to eat matzah. But seemingly the law of carbon, the law of Pesach was the carbon Pesach, so it's not really similar. The other answer to your question, maybe more is because the story didn't happen. The story in the Gemara where they the story in the Chumash, I should say, where they were tamei, did not happen on Sukkot. It happened on Pesach. Yes, Mordechai.
Besides, you don't want to make a Sukkah Sheni on the 15th of Cheshvan, because then it's going to look like Yeravam ben Nevat.
Yeravam ben Nevat, he built, what did he?
Well, he where he made
those calves?
He made it he made that the holiday should be on the 15th of Cheshvan rather than on the 15th of Tishrei.
Is that what we said? I forgot that. He made, that's when he made Sukkot?
Yes.
He made Sukkot. That was the first year that he was when he switched it to I have to look it up again. Okay. Getting things. All right. Interesting. That's a good line. Okay. Anyway, so we've got the law of a child that becomes an adult. Now, I mentioned to you that his bar mitzvah is his birthday is in the middle of Sukkot. I really, to be more exact, Rashi adds in another point that maybe is more correct. That the the adulthood is not just the age. There's also after a child reaches the age of 13, it really, his adulthood is really when he has the two hairs grow in the private area. That is what proves that his adulthood. So he grew those two hairs on the middle of Sukkot. So of course, he's also 13, and he grew those two hairs. That's really what that's the real case where someone would be biblically an adult. In other words, we assume someone is an adult when they reach the age. We assume that they grew the two hairs, the two pubic hairs. But in truth, it's the two pubic hairs that finalize a child turning into an adult. Okay, so that's basically this debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, now we have the next Gemara. The next Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught in a brisa. And we are now about 30 lines from the top of the page, I guess. 5, 10, maybe 35 lines. 35 lines from the top of the page. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, we're in 27b. The rabbis taught in a brisa, Ma'aseh Rabbi Eloi shaholach lahakpil pnei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi. Rabbi Eloi went to greet the face of Rabbi Eliezer, his Rebbe, Belud, in the city of Lud. That was where Rabbi Eliezer lived. This is the Rabbi Eliezer that we've been talking about. And his student, Rabbi Eloi, wanted to go and greet him. Beregel, on Sukkot, on the Yom Tov. So Amar Loi, so Rabbi Eliezer told him, he says, Eloi, Mister, Eincha mishoivsei haregel, you are not from those who rest on the holiday. You should have stayed with your family, with your wife, you should have stayed home. Shahaya Rabbi Eliezer Aimer, Rabbi Eliezer used to say, Meshabeach aniyas ha'atzlanim, I praise those that act in a lazy way. Literally means the lazy ones. I praise the lazy ones. She'ein yoitzin mibatein beregel, who don't leave their house on Sukkot or on the holiday. The Chsiv, as it says, v'samachta ato veistecha, you should rejoice in your household. A person should rejoice with his family, and therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it sounds like you're not supposed to go and greet even your Rebbe. And so Rabbi Eliezer had this opinion that you really should stay home. And Rashi emphasizes by your wife. You should have stayed home, eitzel ishtacha, with your wife. So the Gemara says, Eini, does this make sense that you're not supposed to leave? Doesn't Rabbi Yitzchok say, that how do we know that a person is obligated to greet his Rebbe on the holidays? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, this was about we learned this in Navi, about the Isha Shunamis, the woman whose son died, and Elisha was the one who blessed her with a son, and then the son died, and she told her husband that I want you to get me an animal, and I want to go there. I should go to Elisha. I need to go to Elisha. So he said to her back, Madua atoy lechas elav hayoim. Why are you going to Elisha today? Like Chodesh v'loy Shabbos. It is not Rosh Chodesh, and it is not Shabbos. So why are you going to greet your teacher, Elisha, your Rebbe, your Mechlal b'Chodesh v'Shabbos mechayevin shlok b'lei api rabbi. It shows, we see from here, from this, it's understood, it's Mechlal. But you see from this that on Rosh Chodesh and on Shabbos, a person should greet their teacher. So the understanding is that if Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, you have to greet your teacher, or if a woman has to greet the teacher on Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, so people should greet, the men should greet on Yom Tov. Different ways of understanding what the proof is. Why doesn't it say Yom Tov? It only says Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos. But there is such an understanding that woman is exempt from work on Shabbos and on Rosh, isn't allowed to work on Shabbos and on Rosh Chodesh. So if a woman
term that Yom Tov can also be called Shabbat sometimes.
That's also right. There is such a pshat that Yom Tov is called Shabbos. So that's a good. Yep, no, good call, Victor. That's you saw this, or are you just guessing that?
No, I'm saying other places, but I don't know where.
Yeah,
But
no, that's good. That's great. Yeah. No, commentaries bring that as well. Yeah, that Shabbos could be called anyway. So bottom line is that you see that there is an obligation to greet your Rebbe on Yom Tov. So how could Rebbe Eliezer argue with that? So the Gemara answers like kasha. It's not a contradiction. Oh, the Ozel this law that you're obligated to greet your Rebbe is if you could go and come back in the same day. In this way, you will basically not cause your wife any anguish of not being with her. But the Ozil v'layasi b'yami, this is if you go and you're not going to be able to make it back in the same day and be with your wife, so that would be a problem. And that's where Rabbi Eliezer holds that better you should stay home and not be makabel pnei rabbi and not go to your Rebbe on Yom Tov. And so that is the law of Rabbi Eliezer that it depends how far you live to be able to if you're obligated in being makabel pnei rabbi beregel. Now, interestingly enough, this is not brought in Shulchan Aruch. We've talked about this before. That why is this halacha not brought in Shulchan Aruch that a person's obligated to be makabel pnei rabbi beregel? There's an interesting tshuva from the Noida Yehuda about this, where he mentions that because there's no Beis Hamikdash, and we don't go to be oila regel, so if a person would go to his Rebbe on a Yom Tov, and he doesn't go, you don't go to the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Tov, so you don't go to see Hashem on Yom Tov, but you go to your Rebbe on Yom Tov, so you go more often to your Rebbe than to Hashem. So there's rules about that, and regarding the laws of covet for your Rebbe, that we don't show more covet to our Rebbe than to Hashem, and therefore this is why in Shulchan Aruch it's not brought, because we're dealing with the time of Galus when there's no Beis Hamikdash, so there no longer is a mitzvah to be makabel pnei rabbi beregel, because otherwise, if there was a mitzvah, it would actually make the kavod rabbi greater than the kavod of Hashem. Yes, Jeffrey.
The place that's most famous where Shabbos means Yom Tov is when you're counting the Omer and it says Mimocharas Shabbos.
Machorat Shabbat, right? That's what I was thinking about. Actually, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, it's a good call. It is one of the answers. There are numerous answers that they give of how to explain this Gemara, because that doesn't they're learning from this pasuk. Why doesn't the pasuk say Yom Tov? It only says Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. And
they're also out of order here. You would think Shabbos would come first and Chodesh second.
Right. So one of the answers is that if you live if in Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, you have to be makabel pnei rabbi. If they live within the tchum, within 2,000 amos, because Shabbos you can't walk, and Rosh Chodesh, for whatever reason, that would be also included in in that same rule that would be Shabbos and Chodesh would be if they live close by, within the 2,000 amos. Now, Chol HaMoyed, then you would be obligated to go even outside of the Tchum, because that would be, in other words, the pasuk is only talking about on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, where the obligation to go is only within the Tchum. But on Chol HaMoyed, you have an obligation to travel far, even outside of the Tchum. And so that's why Reb Yitzchok is making a big deal out of this obligation on Yom Tov, because you're even obligated to go outside the Tchum to go see your Rebbe. That was on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. If they live close by, you have a mitzvah to see them. But on Chol HaMoyed, on Yom Tov, you have a mitzvah even to go far. And they bring that. If you look in the story there about this woman, the Isha Shunamis, what did she tell her husband? I'm going to go there and return. And on this, he says, what do you mean? It's not Rosh Chodesh, it's not Shabbos. So it doesn't matter if you return right away. She was saying, go there and return. And the answer to him was, it's not Chodesh and it's not Shabbos. You don't have to. Or on Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, it's only if you're able to come back right away. Anyway, but on Yom Tov, you would be obligated to go and be makabel pnei rabbi, and even outside the tchum, and therefore, so that would be the meaning of Reb Yitzchok's statement. But as the Gemara concludes, but it only if you can get back at least that night. I'm sorry. Let me say it again. The story with this Isha Shunamis. What did she say? She said, "I'm going to go there and return. I'm going to go and return." So, what was she saying when she said that? That he answered her that it's not Chodesh and it's not Shabbos. In other words, what she was saying was that what you see from that dialogue was that the obligation of going and returning right away is on Chodesh and Shabbos. But if it was Yom Tov, then you would actually you would be obligated to go, even if you can't return right, even if it's not immediate return. In other words, even if it's it's a longer trip, then it would be an obligation even to travel further outside the tchum. That's the way they understand it. Now, the problem with that is this way of learning means that you're traveling on Chol HaMoed. The question is that what the Gemara really means? Does the Gemara really mean that you're traveling on Chol HaMoed, or does it mean that you're traveling on Yom Tov, on the actual day of Yom Tov? If you see, the Rashi over here says he went to him on Yom Tov Rishon, or on Yom Tov Rishon he visited him. He went to him from Erev Yom Tov, and he visited him beregel on the regel on Yom Tov Rishon. So Rashi seems to learn that the mitzvah is on the first day of Yom Tov. So if you learn that way, Rashi's not learning like this pshat. This pshat is understanding that the mitzvah is on Chol HaMoed to go, because you have a difference if it's within the tchum or outside of the tchum. On Yom Tov, the obligation would also be within the tchum. But if you learn it means Chol Hamoed, then you could translate it this way, that it means outside of Tchum. So the other point is that Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh is only a mitzvah. On Yom Tov, it's an obligation. That's another way of learning. That Rabbi Yitzchok says you're chayiv to go beregel, and the pasuk over there it shows that there's an inyan even to go on Chodesh and Shabbos, but there's no chiyuv. But you learn from there that on a Yom Tov would be more of an obligation. And then the Pnei Yeshua says what I mentioned, that on Rosh Chodesh men work, women don't work. The pasuk was talking about a woman, so she doesn't work on Rosh Chodesh, so she's obligated to go on Rosh Chodesh. But the man would be obligated to go on Yom Tov. So that would be the way. Those are some of the explanations over here. Oh, my time is up. Okay. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Rabbi, thank you.
Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.